The title of the message today is Endless Mercy. Endless mercy. So I'm teaching today at the Beatitude, blessed are the merciful. In Matthew 5:7, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. We played this game when I was growing up. It's called Mercy. Anybody heard of this game? I got two participants who are going to show us this game. For those of you who don't know, I picked two of the strongest men. You guys stand right there. I'm going to stand behind you. And so the aim of the game is you interlock hands, and the strongest will win. And so the whole point is we're going to use all of our strength to get our opponent to the point that they beg for mercy, and the one who begs for mercy loses. So as you can see, the technique is all about bending someone's wrists so far back that they feel like their wrists are going to snap. You see how Zach's using, this is a little technique right here that I like to use. Oh! Whoa, mercy. Tapped out. I'm sorry, Zach. Appreciate you guys. That was my little illustration of the game of mercy. Can we give it up? Who loves Ben Steinbacher and Zach Garcia for showing us that incredible artwork masterpiece? This game was so crazy when I grew up. Like, it was one of those that you'd see kids playing at school. I can't believe we were playing this in school. If I saw kids playing this in school today, I mean, if kids play this in school today, they'd be picked up and they'd be put in detention. So anyway, I love this game. And that's maybe why I'm a little messed up and I need the Lord. There were 3 strategies to it. There was the basic boy strat, which you've seen the guys illustrate very well. Strategy number 1, use all of your strength all at once and hope for the best. Strategy number 2, I like this one. This is called the low bat strat. It's when you pretend that you're low battery. And so what you do is you pretend that you can't take anything anymore, and you're like, oh, I'm low bat. But all you're doing is tiring your opponent out. I think they have this in wrestling. And once your opponent is tired, then you can. I've seen Zach do that right there. The third strategy is the bluff. I like this strategy. You're bluffing. You get to the point where you pretend you're about to, you just say the beginning of mercy, and then they think they've won, and then you go all in and snap their fingers off. The bluff. The whole aim of the game is do not ask for mercy. Otherwise, you lose. And the only way you're going to win is to cause your opponent so much pain that they ask you for mercy. This game may or may not have theologically damaged my mind. But it's not unrestorable because, hey, he who made all things can restore all things, even my theological damage. But guys, this childhood game may have messed me up, and I may have believed a few lies growing up due to it. Here are a few of the lies that I believed due to my perception of mercy, that receiving mercy wasn't a win, that it was a loss. That's lie number 1. Receiving mercy wasn't a win, but it was a loss. That I don't want to be the recipient of mercy. If I ask for mercy, then I failed. Here's the second lie that I believe due to this. That mercy should not be given unless it is begged for. That I should wait for an apology that I deem sincere enough before I forgive. Is anybody else like this, or is it just me? Am I just here alone with the microphone? Okay, I got 4 people to make me feel a little bit better. Thank you for the sympathy hands. But I'm glad the 5 of us have experienced this together. The Oxford Dictionary defines mercy like this. It says, a kind of forgiving attitude towards somebody. It's going to come up on the screen in 3, 2, 1. the kind of forgiving attitude towards somebody that you have power to harm or right to punish. A kind of forgiving attitude. Many of us are familiar with this kind of mercy described here, a mercy that is an attitude towards somebody, that is something you give. The only issue with this definition is it's very one-dimensional. It's all about showing and giving mercy. There's nothing necessarily in here about the recipient of mercy. I'm not sure about you, but if something is given, then something is received, right? When we're given something, we're also receive something, right? Or do we? Do we receive what is given to us? The word receive, I just found out and just clocked on this week that receive is a verb. Did you know that? The word receive, you can put ing on the end of it. And if you can put ing on the end of it, it's a doing word, which means it's a verb, which means it's an active word. So when we receive something, are we actively doing something, or are we just signing under the dots when we get a package delivered to our door? What is receiving? Hold that thought for just 1 second, because I'm going to take a little tangent the way I do on my little tangent roads. My son was meant to be born 10 days from now on August 2nd, but he decided he wanted to arrive 3 weeks ago on June the 29th, which is 5 weeks early. He wanted to get out and say hello to everybody. And due to this, everybody had been so generous, and we'd received so many gifts. Gifts were given to us left, right, and center, and we were so, so blessed. Some neighbors of ours had given us some gifts. They live in our apartment complex, and they're the only neighbors who've just had the only neighbors in the apartment complex who have a kid. So they had their child last year. He's just turned 1 year old, and he's so chubby and cute. And so they gave us a basket of gifts. And I was so excited. I grabbed this basket of gifts, and come home, and then I open it, and then I realized that this basket of gifts is actually a laundry basket of gifts, and the laundry basket of gifts is a laundry basket of clothes, and the laundry basket of clothes have some questionable stains. I didn't check the rest of that blessing of a basket. That blessing of a basket turned into a burden of a basket. And I'll confess to you right now that maybe, just maybe, that basket went from our apartment all the way down to the dumpster. And I may have thrown some trash on top to cover it up so that it's not seen. God, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. I confess right now. I didn't check what was in the basket because I didn't see the value in what I'd received. For all I'd known, there could have been an extremely valuable item in there. Somehow, somewhat. They could have been $1,000 in an envelope, and it could have just fell away. But I just didn't check. Who knows? We'll never know. But my perception of receiving that is, yes, one man's trash is another man's treasure, but my perception was one man's trash is now my trash. I have 1 point today, and I'm sorry, production team, I don't have it up on here because it came a little later than usual, but if you're taking notes, which I highly recommend you do, there is only 1 point today. So write this down. Here's my point. If you perceive value, you will receive value. Turn your neighbor and say, if you perceive value, turn to your other neighbor and tell them, you will receive value. If you perceive value, you will receive value. Here's a parable. Here's a parable. I'm beginning to sound like my son. Here's a parable that Jesus taught about a man who's just like me. He didn't see the value in what he'd received. What was freely given to him, he didn't see the value in it. It's the parable of the unmerciful servant. Anybody know this parable? Matthew 18, 23 to 35. The context is Peter is asking Jesus, how many times should I forgive my brother? 7 times, Jesus? Is that how many times? And Jesus says, no, 70 times 7 is the amount of times you should forgive him. He continues to say this. He says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wishes to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. Whoa. 10,000 talents. It's a lot. Do you know how much 10,000 talents is? How much is it? I heard the whisper. 10,000 talents. So 1 talent was equivalent to, if you're working minimum wage, 16 years worth of labor. 16. If he owed 1 talent, imagine just working 16 years, that's 5,840 days with no breaks to pay off the debt. 16 years for 1 talent. He owed 10,000 of them. Anybody do maths? Here, Ben Steinbach. What's 16 years multiplied by 10,000? 160,000 years of labor. This man was in debt to his king. That's a lot of debt. That's debt that doesn't just surpass your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson. That's roughly about 5,000 generations worth of debt. And so the king turns to him and he says, I want payment. I want you to be sold with your wife and children and all that you have, and payment also to be made. So the servant fell to his knees, imploring the king, have patience with me, and I will pay everything. Have patience with me. And he's begging for mercy. And out of pity for him, the master of the servant released him and forgave him the debt. I don't know, imagine just being forgiven 160,000 years worth of labor. What would you do? I'd rejoice. Would you? I'd rejoice. I'd be rejoicing. Out of pity, the master of the servant released him and forgave him the debt. But when the same servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. So how much is 100 denarii? 1 talent, which is 16 years worth of labor, is roughly around 6,000 denarii. So 100 denarii is around about 3.5 months worth of labor. He says, you owe me 100 denarii. And seizing him, he began to choke him. He said, pay what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him, have patience with me and I will pay you. He refused and went and put him in prison until he should pay his debt. When his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed and went out and reported to their master all that had taken place. Then his master summoned him and said, you wicked servant, I forgave you all the debt because you pleaded with me, and should not you have had the mercy on your fellow servant, as I had mercy on you? And in anger, his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all of his debt. So also, this is Jesus speaking now, so also my heavenly Father would do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. What a convicting parable, what a convicting story. Maybe it's a stark contrast between the dirty laundry and the story of the dirty laundry and the story of the unmerciful servant. I know They're a little different, but there are some parallels. Okay? And the one parallel is that we both did not perceive value in what we had received. We both did not perceive the value in what we received. For everything that comes from God is highly valuable. God doesn't give things that aren't of value. He is the beginning and the end. Anything that comes from him is highly valuable. Just one word from his mouth can set you free. Just one breath from his lungs and you'll be full of life. Just one promise and you'll be full of hope. Everything that comes from God is highly valuable. Turn back to Matthew 5:7. It says, blessed are the merciful. Blessed meaning supreme happiness and joy. There's supreme happiness and joy in those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy, for they shall receive mercy. King James says, for they shall obtain mercy. There's some action required. But hold on, Jesus. Let's just rewind back. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. So if I'm merciful, how can I receive mercy? Because that's kind of contradicting there. Like, how can I have mercy and then receive mercy? No. What Jesus is saying there, right there, is he says, if you can't give mercy, then you have yet to receive it. If mercy doesn't run through you, then you haven't received it. If mercy doesn't run through you, then you have not yet received it. If we are not merciful, then we have not received the fullness of God's mercy. God's mercy is so valuable that when you receive it, you can't help but just give it away. God's mercy is so valuable that when you've got it, it doesn't end with you. God's mercy is so valuable that you're not the only benefactor, but your family is, your in-laws are, your cousin's boyfriend, your cousin's boyfriend, sister's roommate. You get the picture. The very people around you will benefit from the mercy of God because what he has given you is way more valuable. This is what it says in Lamentations chapter 3, verses 22 to 23. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercy never comes to an end. Get that? His mercy never comes to an end. His mercy is endless. Endless mercy. His mercy is endless. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. What a passage of scripture. Because God is the beginning and end. Do you think what comes from him has an end? If he is infinite, then what he has for us is also infinite. When God gives, there is no end. Anything and everything that comes from he who has no limits has no limits. Isn't that amazing? If what we receive has no end, how can we, limited beings, contain it? If God is to give us something, and that thing is infinite, how am I, whom's in time and has limits? I'm limited in my storage. I'm limited in my energy. I'm limited in the time I have here on earth. I'm limited in many ways. So how can I receive something that is infinite? I can't contain what God has for me. Some of you have been saying this week, I just don't have the capacity right now. I just don't have the capacity for it. You're right, you don't have the capacity. You're completely limitless. No, limited, sorry. You're completely limited. God is completely limitless. You cannot contain what he has for you. But here's the beauty in it all. When Jesus says, greater it is to give than it is to receive. It is greater to give than to receive, because in order to receive, you got to maintain it, you got to store it. We're limited on our storage, we're limited on how we can maintain things. But when we give, we know where it comes from. Pastor Kirsten said, when we know the source, when we know where it comes from, because when we recognize that mercy comes from Him, when you recognize that generosity is just giving away what God has already given you, when you recognize that what you received has no end, you ought to rejoice. When you recognize that what God has deposited inside of you will just overflow in abundance. God, you've given me more than I ever needed, that I can pour out into my family. I can pour out into my friendships. God, your mercy is so abundant. It is endless. Therefore, it does not end with me. I cannot contain the mercy I have, for the mercy I have received is endless. Mercy flows in, mercy flows out. Mercy flows into me, so mercy will flow out of me. His mercy that is unlimited flows into me. Therefore, it will flow out of me. Jesus teaches this parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10, 25 through 37. And behold, a lawyer stood up. Lawyer here is a man who studied the Mosaic law. It's not like the lawyer we would know, sort of like an attorney in suits. So this lawyer stood up and put him to the test. He said, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus says, what? What is written in the law? What's in the law? You're a lawyer. How do you read it? And so the lawyer answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul and all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." So Jesus said to him, "You've answered correctly. Do this and you'll live." But he desired to justify himself. Who's this lawyer trying to justify himself? "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus, will you just define neighbor for me? I don't know what he was thinking. Your neighbor is somebody who lives in close proximity to you, bro. Like, what's going on? Who's my neighbor? Jesus replied with this parable, just straight into a parable. No response, but a story. He says, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him, and they departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down the road." Amazing, this priest has arrived. No, he passed by. "So likewise a Levite, he's going to come." No, he passed by. But then a Samaritan comes by. And if you know much about Jews and Samaritans, they didn't have it together. They hated one another. There was a lot of beef between them. But the Samaritan came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. When he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn to take care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back." Hence where we get the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus then proceeds to say, "Which of the 3 people do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell on robbers? And his response is, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said, go and do likewise. I have a theory. My theory is that the lawyer was asking Jesus his questions because loving his neighbors on his street, on his block, in his neighborhood, he had no problem doing that. Maybe they were like him. Maybe they earned the same wage as him. Maybe they had a lot of similarities. Hence why he was asking, define my neighbor, in hopes that Jesus would say the one who lives in a 3-mile radius of you, hoping that Jesus would say the one whom dwells close to you. But most likely Jesus knew his heart. Jesus was saying, your neighbor is not the one whom you dwell close to. Your neighbor is the one whom you draw close to. Your neighbor isn't the one you dwell close to, but your neighbor is the one whom you draw close to. God's heart isn't for those just in close proximity to him. His heart's desire is to draw close in proximity to you. God's desire is to draw close to every single broken family, every single struggling marriage, every single hurting person, every single confused person. God's heart is to draw close to you. His mercies aren't limited. His mercies aren't endless. His mercy has no expiry date. His mercy does not stop when we reach the fringes of Los Angeles. His mercy does not stop when we reach the edge of the horizon. Oh, would you give him all the honor and all the praise? Could you just stand to your feet, do me a favor? If you've got breath in your lungs right now, we're just going to have a bit of a praise party.